Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses here to testify today. At the 75th anniversary of NATO Summit in Washington last year, conversations about the Indo-Pacific took the stage in ways they never had before. The alliance's decision to deepen engagement with regional partners like Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand signals a shift in strategic priorities. This was also recognition that Europe and the Indo-Pacific are linked. NATO's European members are now deploying assets to the region, signing on to joint exercises, coordinating cyber and hybrid defense cooperation with Indo-Pacific allies. Additionally, the summit's endorsement of the NATO Indo-Pacific partnership, along with the growing defense industrial links between South Korea, Japan, and the European NATO members, as well as AUKUS, marks an evolution in the alliance's posture. Mr. Rao, what is the real value of NATO's Indo-Pacific outreach, and what should the future coordination look like?
Well, for one, I think it's in the American vital interest that there is a pro-American balance of power on both ends of the Eurasian landmass. And if the Russians are going to forge tight links with the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians, then I think it behooves us to try to bring together lessons learned on both sides of the Eurasian landmass, to learn lessons on defense industrial-based cooperation. You'll note that, that Poland recently signed a major procurement deal with South Korea for the provision of tanks, for example. And so I think there is a lot of mutual support that can be undertaken in the free world amongst partners and allies, and we can share a common threat perception, which I think is also useful. That's one of the reasons why I think NATO should be a Russia-focused continental deterrence organization, nonetheless has a role in being active in the Indo-Pacific because it can see exactly what is taking place, how China's aggression is unfolding, and I think that's a useful exercise for our partners.
Are there practical steps that NATO could do to develop meaningful co-development defense technologies in the region?
Well, for starters, NATO sought to open a liaison office in Tokyo. That was ultimately blocked by the French. I think there are opportunities for tighter linkage there. Clearly, Japan and South Korea have first-rate, cutting-edge technology and defense industrial-based capabilities, which our European partners could learn from, and I would just encourage more collaboration in all of those areas.
In your opening remarks, you mentioned about the 5 for 5, NATO going to a 5% of GDP defense spending target. And this will include 3.5% for core military spending and 1.5% for broader defense and security related measures. Obviously, at the Wales Summit in 2014, we saw NATO committing to 2%, and it took a decade for most of the allies to start even getting in that direction. Today's threat environment doesn't really allow for a decade to get to 5%. As I mentioned in your written testimony, you said you would ratify a new 5% goal should be achieved in a 5-year horizon. Can you tell us why it's so important we get that so soon rather than taking 7 to 10 years to achieve this target?
Well, simply put, the intelligence assessments all suggest that there is an urgent threat and that Russia is rebuilding. It's standing up the new 44th Army Corps in Karelia opposite Finland. The new targets for the Russian armed forces are to put 1.5 million men under arms. All of that suggests that Russia will be facing NATO once the war in Ukraine is ultimately wound down, if it is wound down. And so I think it's very important that we begin to take those measures. It's not just the time horizon, but on top of that, I think very carefully crafting what the categories are for 3.5 and 1.5% of GDP, so that areas like climate spending, for example, don't count towards defense-adjacent military expenditures.
Yeah. Dr. Polikova, do you have anything you want to add to that with regard to the 5%?
I completely agree, and I think the reason that it has to happen much more rapidly than we've seen in the past is that Europe really has no choice at this point. I think there's broad recognition of that. Would I like to see European allies commit to 5% on core defense spending, not the 3.5, 1.5 split? Yes. This is, I see as a step to get there, but not the ultimate conclusion. I would like to see them continue spend, but I think if they move in that direction, we need to also spend more on our defense because we're below 3.5% right now. So that would be the counterpoint there.
Great, thanks. I've only just got a few seconds of time left. Mr. Rao, you wrote a little bit in your thing about AI diffusion. Can you talk a little bit about why what the previous policy was, for example, so insulting to our allies like Poland?
Well, in January, the outgoing Biden administration issued an AI diffusion rule that essentially tiered our allies into different categories for AI chips. And Poland, since you mentioned it, was considered a Category 2 partner, meaning it didn't have access to certain AI chips. And this could have implications for the rollout of 6G. It could have implications for the types of software embedded in different weapon systems like the F-35. And so I think the European Commission, and in particular our Eastern European allies, who never understood, and this is directly, I think, the case for Warsaw, why they were placed in Category 2, are pleased that the Trump administration has lifted that diffusion rule.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.